was the person who was trying to create the division, Ted Cruz. Interestingly enough, even though Bernie Sanders is trying to suck up to the Democrat establishment now, his supporters aren't having it. It's flip-flopped exactly the opposite of the way that it was at the RNC.
Now, they partly were responsible, the Democratic Party, the media establishment, the leftist media establishment, for creating this kind of Bernie monster. Now, obviously, you've got a lot of principled Bernie supporters, even if you don't agree with them. But you've also got this more violent bunch, which they, of course, unleashed at the Trump events, which they used to blame Trump for that violence. Now it appears that it's starting to blow back in their faces, correct?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the people that we've talked to inside the convention center, people who are delegates, and we're going to be talking to them this evening, is the roll call vote. So we're going to be talking to the disgruntled, disaffected, shut down Bernie Sanders delegates at the convention tonight. But the people we were talking to in the convention, Paul, were pretty articulate. They understood the issues. They were not in total propaganda mode, unlike the Hillary Clinton supporters we talked to. I talked to a woman who was from the Ukraine, basically trying to make the case that we should be starting World War III with the Russians, talking about how Putin was behind the DNC leaks. And, of course, Snowden has shut this down. I think it's interesting. I saw Carl Bernstein from Watergate reporting, of course, and during Watergate, at the height of the Cold War, we never had anybody put out the idea that Russia was behind the Watergate leaks, okay? Nobody suggested that Deep Throat was a Russian, and yet that's the first place that they jumped. They're trying to cover up the fact that Hillary Clinton's other email scandal was a massive treasure trove of documents to the Russians and anybody else who wanted to read the highest level secrets, and yet they will not make that connection. No matter how many times you pointed out that it's John Deutsch, Bill Clinton's CIA director, that was facing prison terms before Clinton gave him a pardon, how he lost his security clearance. Here they want to elect somebody, and she's going to get a security briefing at the end of the week, even though she's already turned over all the secrets. They said last week when Trump got the nomination, he wasn't going to get the security briefing until after Hillary Clinton got it. And I said, well, at that point, it's not going to be secret anymore. All this stuff is going to be out in the public domain.
No, it's amazing. There was absolutely no concern about China and Russia penetrating Hillary's emails, but then they weave this yarn that Russia is behind this DNC hack with virtually no evidence whatsoever. Another obvious issue that we've got bubbling up is they tried to introduce this DNC convention on the basis of, uniting the party in opposition to, in comparison to the RNC, which was, they portrayed it as divisive, a shambolic affair. Now we've had this DNC leak. Do you see the aftermath, the polls? Obviously, the recent polls show Trump edging ahead. Do you think that the Democratic Party will get the same bump in the polls that the Republican Party, that Trump did, given that this whole scandal has clouded the DNC?
I think in public opinion polls, like they're going to, when you look at these conventions, it's 4 days of continuous infomercials and propaganda. They always get a bump in the polls. Question is, how big is it going to be? And I don't think it's going to be that big, especially when you look at things like, Paul, last night I talked to Jesse Jackson on the floor, and I said, you're going to have people here who are family members of black people who've been killed by the police. I said, but you don't have anybody here speaking who are family members of the police who have been killed. And he starts off and he lists out, as we see them do all the time, you pointed it out, as well as Alex, I pointed out, they always start with the cases like Michael Brown, where it was ambiguous to start with, or Trayvon Williams, and it was ambiguous to start with, and then they had an investigation. And so they always go with these instead of the ones that are clear-cut, obvious police brutality. So he rattles that off, and I said, yeah, but why don't you have the police stand up? He goes, it's horrible what happened to the police in Dallas. So, well, why don't you have them speak at this convention? He goes, yeah, we should look into it. Look, they were the police chief, not the police chief, but the police union head here in Philadelphia pointed that out last week. I was just giving him the points that the police union chief had made last week. They knew about this. They don't want the police in there. So it's not going to be unifying for the country, Paul. They may be able to unify themselves on the politics, get everybody drummed up playing clips of Mario Cuomo. but they are very divisive, very exclusive to the rest of the country. The whole thing people are talking about, the fact they don't have any American flags on display last night during the convention. They had a big one up on the Jumbotron monitor in the afternoon, but not during the convention. It wasn't filled with flags like it was with Trump and things like that. So, you know, they have their gods that they worship, and they are very divisive about what they look at. So I don't think they're going to get as big a jump as Trump did.
Okay, David. Final comments. Obviously, we've got this discord amongst Bernie supporters. Do you think that'll be tamped down by these efforts, by, Silverman, all these other people to try and assuage that? Or do you think there will be more rancor? Do you see maybe somebody rushing the stage in the final couple of days of this convention?
I think you're going to see rancor outside of the convention, but they got the convention pretty well under control. I think what you're going to see going forward, Paul, these people that we've talked to there, they really understand the TPP. They're very upset about that, but they can't get themselves, in most cases, to vote for Trump. So they're not going to get anything out of this election. They could get one thing from Donald Trump, and that would be to shut down the TPP. But because of this prejudice, there's this bias that they have, this tribe that they identify with, they won't be able to vote even for that one thing that is a very important issue to them. Most of the people that were there either had a Bernie sign or they had a homemade no TPP sign. They had large signs that they carried in that they put over their laps. So moving forward, that's the key. Are they going to vote for something, or are they just going to be frustrated? This is not part of a movement, I don't think. You've seen this guy basically throw his supporters to the side. I don't know what's going on in the background, if they've cut a deal with him, if they're blackmailing him, or whatever the deal is. But it is really amazing to see Bernie Sanders betray his supporters. And he was booed yesterday at one of the events when he started talking about Hillary Clinton. They're still very angry about that. I don't think that's going to go away before the election. So they're going to stay home even if they don't vote on the other side. That's going to hurt Hillary Clinton.
Okay, David, we'll leave it for there. We'll let you switch with Joe Biggs, and then Joe can come in after the break. So we'll allow you to do that there at the DNC with the latest. But for now, we'll continue in the final few minutes with news. And again, we've had yet another jihadist terror attack in Europe every single day now, it seems. We almost went 48 hours without having one. I mean, it was blissful for 48 hours without one of these migrants going jihad, and then it happened again. Now, of course, at the DNC, they're not talking about it. ISIS has not been mentioned once, and the media cover-up is already beginning in the West. Of course, our governments are more outraged about, xenophobic comments on Twitter, racist comments on Facebook, God forbid, people criticizing the mass invasion of migrants flooding into their country. That's what we're told we should be concerned about. This is what we saw in the aftermath of Brexit. Not how are we going to actually leave the European Union now? What does this mean for the future of the country? No, it was, oh my God, there are 30 more incidents of hate crime that have been reported to the police. Again, not actual evidence of hate crime, just reported to the police. Then you look into it, it's, ambiguous graffiti on Polish community centers and things like that. But this is what we're told we should be really concerned about. Xenophobic comments on Twitter, Donald Trump's politically incorrect rhetoric. That's what we should be concerned about. Meanwhile, they're beheading priests. They're plowing through tourists, locals in Nice with trucks. They're machete attacking pregnant women on the streets of Germany. They're axe attacking train passengers in Germany. Almost every day now, every single day nearly, we see this happening, and we see this apologia, not only from the left, but from the mainstream media. Again, the BBC for hours refused to even draw any attention to the fact that these people were obviously Muslims. They were chanting pro-ISIS slogans. Of course, since they've claimed responsibility for the attack, they were chanting Allah Akbar. The BBC reported for hours afterwards, no known motive. Again, go back to the Munich shooting on Friday. They excised out the name of the shooter, Ali, despite the fact that almost every other media outlet included his full name. They took it out. Now, you can talk about the Munich shooting, well, he was bullied, maybe that was a motivation. Certainly Anders Breivik wasn't a motivation. This guy wasn't some extreme right-wing Christian, okay? But what did the BBC talk about for hours and hours afterwards? Anders Breivik. They're really keen to talk about that, not so keen to talk about the religion of peace. Now, we got more headlines about this, and again, we're coming back, we're going to get Joe Biggs on. But they knew this guy, they had him tagged. He was a convicted terrorist. This is out the Express. One of the two knifemen who murdered a priest during a morning mass at a church in Normandy was a convicted terrorist who was known to the French authorities and should have been monitored with an electronic tag. The as-yet unnamed individual attempted to travel to Syria in 2015 to fight with Islamic State, but was arrested in Turkey, it has emerged. And again, why was he allowed to get back into France, even though he was arrested in Turkey last year? Well, that's because the French Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, said back in 2013 that France was perfectly okay with allowing these jihadists to move back and forth. He said, quote, "The fighters in Syria are not fighting France or Europe, they're fighting Assad's regime." So as long as they were fighting Assad, a secular leader that was dealing with Al-Qaeda in his own country, they turned a blind eye. It led to Paris. It led to Nice. It led to the beheading of this priest in Normandy. We'll be back on The Alex Jones Show with Joe Biggs after this. Go back. It's The Alex Jones Show live. Coming up in the next hour, we've got author and activist Tommy Robinson to talk about the religion of peace and today's beheading in Normandy, France. But now we've got Joe Biggs on the line from the DNC. Now, Joe, I saw that you crashed a Fox Business broadcast with a Trump sign. Tell us about that. Tell us how this differs to the RNC, which you were at a few days ago.
Well, actually, when I was walking around last night, they were handing out these signs that says, "Love Trump's hate." And I'm sitting there thinking, why did no one think about this? This is a great idea. I'm going to fold this up and pretty much just walk around. So I just kind of photobombed Fox News Business, CNN with Wolf Blitzer, Chris Hayes on MSNBC. When I went up behind Chris Hayes, they had a conniption fit. They were flipping out. The camera guys are sitting there doing this and like pointing at me, but they couldn't scream because Chris Hayes was live with some other lady. And I was just sitting there just laughing, walking around, but kind of hijacked the whole thing to really bring attention to the fact that, what happened to the DNC last night I thought was pretty horrific. The fact that there was zero patriotism at all happening there whatsoever. All it was they would bring out a Hispanic speaker, and then he would talk about, Donald Trump talks about he wants to deport people like me because he says we're all criminals. No, he said that there were criminals coming across. Then they go, well, Donald Trump made a comment about handicapped people. So then they bring out this handicapped girl, and then she goes, well, he's making fun of me. And then Eva Longoria comes out and goes, well, I have a handicapped sibling. And when Donald Trump said that, he was making fun of my sibling. And the whole crowd sitting there pandering to the whole thing, and they're all laughing and they're screaming and all this stuff. But when you actually were at the RNC, you saw Trump talk about, hey, radical Islam's a problem. Since 2015, over 40,000 people across the world have been killed by radical Islam. And yet people like Black Lives Matter want to talk about and put a magnifying glass on these police killings. You have a better chance of being struck by lightning than you do by being shot by a cop. Now, most of these people who are famously known, like the Michael Browns, they're being held as these heroes under a false narrative. When you actually go back and you look at it all, his hands weren't up. And he had just got done robbing a store. And he charged at the officer. And yet they still run around screaming, hands up, don't shoot. The stuff that we see at the DNC is complete and total BS. The fact that the DNC leaks can come out and Debbie Wasserman Schultz can be behind it. Then Hillary Clinton comes out right afterwards and says that Debbie Wasserman Schultz did everything she could to get me to the point where I am, pretty much admitting to the fact that the DNC was putting her in the position to throw Bernie out of the way and for her to take over and get the nomination. And then what does Hillary Clinton do? She makes her the honorary chairman of her campaign, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So it's completely and totally ridiculous, the amount of corruption. But when you have nothing on someone, all they do is go, Trump's sexist, he's racist, blah, blah, blah. He said something that hurt my feelings. And that's all they have. We can go on for days and days and emails and classified emails to prove the corruption at the DNC and with Hillary Clinton.
Exactly. I mean, sexist, bigoted remarks are replete in those DNC leaked emails anyway. So again, complete hypocrisy. There were no American flags there, basically. You were in Iraq, you were in Afghanistan. They had 60 speeches and didn't mention ISIS once. In the final minute, give us your closing comments, Joe Biggs.
Yeah, exactly.